Hello, my name is Jim Townsend, and I'm the Executive Director of Houston Cinema Art Society. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 13th annual Houston Cinema Arts Festival. Our virtual and indoor and outdoor cinematic offerings this year are meant to give something to everyone. And the theme of this year's festival is the Third Coast, where we are celebrating, examining, and exploring all of the things that make our region unique, special, our art, our culture, our people, and the unique challenges that we face. And I think one of the most important things that we're doing as part of this festival is having some pretty serious conversations and screenings regarding the environmental concerns that we have regionally. I'm very, very honored today to welcome Ronald L. Jones, who is a documentary filmmaker and multidisciplinary artist working out of the Houston area. Thank you, Ronald. Thanks for being here.
Okay.
Ronald's film is Again Together, the Cumulative Impact of Environmental Racism in Houston. And showed live at Rice Cinema on Saturday, November 13th, and we're sharing virtually now. So thrilled that you could be here, Ronald. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be here.
We're also very honored to be joined today by Matthew Tejada of the Environmental Protection Agency. Matthew is the Director of Environmental Justice. Did I get that right?
You got it right.
Okay, good. Good. And thank you so much, both of you, for taking time out of your very busy schedules to be here today, talking about the impacts of environmental racism in Houston. It's something we really want to get into, that we really want to address and spread the word about. So we're really, really glad that you could be a part of this.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Let's talk first, Ronald, about your amazing film. It's a short film, Again Together, the Cumulative Impact of Environmental Racism in Houston. And I was hoping you wouldn't mind telling us about the impetus for it. Where'd you get the idea for it? Why was it important to you?
Well, it actually was a thing that was set in motion by One Breath Partnership. They were seeking someone to produce or direct a short film that, from my original understanding, was to be an internal document that they would be using to do like workshops and things like that. But when I came into the picture, it was through an email from my friend Carrie Marie Schneider, who I've done countless projects with, video documentation of, and I just, it was a opportunity to either be the camera person or produce the film, and I just walked away from a project not a month earlier, and because I didn't feel like they had I didn't feel like they cared enough about the community that they're trying to create an impact for. And with this project, I either could take on the same role of being the person that just documents or being the person that produces. And I felt like I felt strongly enough about how I felt about the community and what I thought the project could be. And so I took it up.
Wonderful. So what was the process then, where you found these wonderful people to interview and be vulnerable in the way that they were with you? Like, how did that come together?
That was not the easiest part. That came about through one of the persons that was also a part of One Breath Partnership at the time, my friend Chris Valdez. He became our friend through the process. We did a lot of sit-ins on meetings of local groups that were organizing, that had come together as organizations, and we just put the word out saying that we were looking for folks that were affected by certain criteria that fit a certain criteria. But it became this process of whether or not we were just trying to find a person that was like this composite character, and I wanted to get away from the idea that we were just trying to find someone that fit, and I just really wanted to get to meet people. And I think that was the hardest part, is getting people to become vulnerable for a project they didn't know the end result of. And, I went around with Miss Dolores Magruder, one of the persons in the documentary. And the first day we went around, we went to drop off flyers for people, for community members that were letting them know about an upcoming meeting. And the first house we went to, the gentleman that opened the door was super like not having it. He was like, I won't say irate, but he was understandably like a little unhappy with someone coming to ask him for information to be a part of a thing, or just like because so many people had come into the neighborhood of Fifth Ward making promises and not having fulfilled any of them really. And at that point, it made me take a step back and really think about what it is I thought I knew about what was going on in the community. And at that point, that's when I really just kind of started to want to know more, not from like the documentation, or I won't say documentation, not from a uh, informational standpoint, but like from a lived experience standpoint. And I felt like the story was to allow people to share their experiences and find the documentation to link it to the sources of that.
I imagine, Matthew, that you've probably experienced something like this too, where you're trying to collect information from people in these affected areas, and I'm sure there's some hesitation.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard. And as Ronald was speaking, I was remembering some of my early days when I was actually running a community organization there in Houston, and my first experiences door knocking and organizing and block walking, and just the reception of folks to somebody coming around, either offering information or asking for information. It is one of the tougher things that you can do as either a community organizer or as a civil servant, right? Actually getting out on the street, trying to engage with communities, trying to provide the sort of information, the support, or even just the spaces, right, where communities feel like they can come forward and feel like they're actually being heard. And to what Ronald was just saying too, one of the phrases that's a big phrase for us at EPA is that lived experience, right? Coming to a place where they feel like they can really offer their lived experience in a way where they're being engaged, they're being heard, and the folks that are on the other side of that conversation are actually going to take that back and try to do something with it, right? Try to be responsive to the fact that we have communities that are disproportionately overburdened, have excessive vulnerabilities to pollution and to other threats to their health and to their safety. So trying to begin that process of meaningfully engaging with communities, it's absolutely critical to everything that we do at EPA.
Yeah, I would imagine. It's such a tricky thing for whatever kind of service that you're trying to provide to be, somebody who reaches out in a way that is inviting people to be partners and inviting people to. You're not telling them what they need, or you're not telling them what you're bringing to them. You're asking for them to be participants in that, and that's, I'm sure, very challenging. Ronald, I have to say, what an incredible job you did, getting those people to open up in that way and to show that much character in that film.
I cried a couple of times, well, several times, because it was like, you don't know how many times a person has probably told that story to someone that didn't listen, right? And for them to become vulnerable again on camera for a project they didn't know, or they wouldn't see until it was completed, and didn't know the final outcome of. So, I mean, I'm very grateful, not just for having been able to be a part of the project, but for them being vulnerable with me and giving me the information that I didn't have, and tools that I could use going forward.
Were you able to share the completed project with the participants?
Yes.
What were the reactions?
I think the best reaction was from Miss Doris Brown. There were times when I had asked for like photos, and she was asking one of the other persons, Alice Torres, why is he asking for photos? Like, why does he need these photos for? And but when she saw it, she really appreciated it. She really liked it, and I think that's all I really wanted. I mean, the whole thing was just for me to be able to not put my finger on a thing or to say this is how a thing is, but to just find a way to amplify the stories that already exist and give them the platform that they deserve to say the things that they've experienced, and bring the conversation to an audience that has not, or may not have like the understanding of what they've been experiencing, like some of them like their entire life.
Were you surprised by anything that you discovered from them? I mean, you went into it with the sense that you're not going to create the narrative. You're going to collect the narrative as it exists. So I'm sure there were all kinds of things that you had no idea you were going to uncover.
Yeah, I didn't, I didn't even know the sit-ins. I didn't know sit-ins happened here. And then I found out that Miss Brown, that she was a part of those, and she was like 14 years old. So it's, I don't know, it's a crazy thing to think that, the civil rights movement was so far away when, the people that existed in that time are like living in, close proximity to us.
Yeah. I wonder about this too. And Matthew, maybe you can weigh in on this one too, because there was a lot of images in Ronald's film of people gathering in Emancipation Park, people kind of gathering in parks, and having these conversations together. So the sense of community around these conversations is very strong in the film. And Matthew, I know that you ran an environmental nonprofit organization in Houston for a long time. So I'm kind of curious to know how one collects those crowds and builds that sense of community so that you can do what Ronald was trying to do in the film and collect the narrative instead of create it.
Sure. From my experience, a couple of points. First, I think a lot of times folks who aren't from these communities, these heavily impacted, overburdened communities, they don't really understand the depth of resilience that exists in those communities, right? That there's real community in them, that people know one another, people look out for one another. And that's not to say there's not the regular baggage that goes along with,
Sure.
putting up in other people's businesses, but there's real resilience in a lot of these communities. And for whatever you're trying to work on, whether it's an environmental justice issue or access to transportation or healthcare or healthy food, or just, trying to bring economic development into the community that really builds wealth and retains wealth in the actual community, not displacing folks or not, fixing things just so other folks can come in and enjoy it. That is all centered on the community being organized, right? The community actually coming together. And a lot of times in communities that are overburdened, right, the environment might be the 10th or 11th thing on folks' list of priorities. But when you really start to get folks to talk to one another and start to kind of connect the dots between the pollution they're exposed to, the lack of economic opportunity, just the other impacts that they face on a daily basis, it can be really powerful that folks start to, connect those dots and start to see the way that all of these things work together. And in order to have real progress in that community, you have to look at the holistic set of challenges that community is faced with. And you really need the community to come forward and say, this is the vision of what we want to see happen, right? We want this fixed. We want this opened up. We want this moved forward. And once you start working with a community or engaging with a community where that sort of resilience has come together in that sort of a cohesive vision of what they want to see for their future, for their kids' future, that is so powerful. That's one of the things that across the country, right, the communities that I think have had the most success at really moving the needle, changing things happen on the ground. One, it's due to those communities organizing, right? But it's a critical element. It's a beginning element that you need to have there in order for these communities to move forward. So, lifting up that reality, lifting up again that lived experience of a community like the Fifth Ward that's coming together, really trying to look at its future in that part of Houston. It's an absolutely critical part that all of us need, regardless of the role that we play in helping that community achieve that future vision.
I was sort of delighted in the film to see the fifth. I mean, as much as the challenges that they face are really difficult, but to see the woman on the porch who was talking about how the families they show up for each other. I was a teacher in that neighborhood for a while, and I can say when the school bell rings and the kids are dismissed, there is a sense of they're getting watched on the way home, and there's people turn out to take care of the kids and the families, and that's really beautiful, to kind of see that and to see that reflected in the film, even with all these challenges going on. But I also, this is very much a film about family, and as a Houstonian, and I know you guys have both been Houstonians on and off also, but as a Houstonian who's come back home to raise my family here, you think about these environmental issues all the time, and you think, you're doing that calculus, and you're thinking about, like, am I doing the right thing for my children by involving them in this community where these risks, and I don't know. I mean, how do you speak to this sense of generational dealing with this problem? One generation is maybe not so aware that it's creeping up around them. The next generation is watching both their parents and children being affected by the environmental problems that they're all facing, and still making the choice to be a part of that community, and making the choice to not leave, or maybe they don't have that choice. So, I just kind of wonder what you've encountered there when it comes to people making those decisions about their families and about raising their children.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I was actually just in the Fifth Ward a few weekends ago and was speaking with some young folks. One young person who had recently come back to the Fifth Ward because it's where he was from, and he wanted to come back there. There were a couple other young folks there that, wanted to come back to the Fifth Ward, but were struggling, one, with, do I really want to move back to a place that might be impacting my health or might impact the health of my future family? And also just issues, again, of kind of displacement and just gentrification that are already happening. I mean, even with all of the challenges faced in Fifth Ward, it's still right there north of downtown, right? There's a lot of pressure on the Fifth Ward right now. So that idea of, again, the history of that community, the resilience that still exists in that community, and that intergenerational aspect of not just the folks who are there today, but the folks that are, older in that community, the real arc of multi-generations, especially in places like the Fifth Ward that are these historic African-American communities, in places like Houston. There's a real sense of connection to that. And that's something that, by and large, unfortunately, we don't value that enough. We don't value what it means to have that sort of history, to have that sort of connection in terms of, making sure places are protected, making sure that places are not, excessively vulnerable to the impacts from a changing climate, which I know Fifth Ward obviously has been struggling with a lot of the hurricanes and floods that have been hitting Houston over the last several years. That's a real thing. And that's one of the things that, from our perspective in the EJ program and the environmental justice program at EPA, we're always lifting up that fact that there's value in the lived experience and the histories and the culture of these communities that is very unique to those communities. And there's real value in that, not just, monetary value, but value in us to learn, to do better, to advance our ability to protect health, to protect the environment. We have to embrace and understand what that history means for that community, and look not just backwards, not just look at today, but, always be looking into the future. That's another huge element just of the EJ movement, right? There's always been an intergenerational aspect to the environmental justice movement. And we at EPA and the EJ program, we very much, are part of that and part of lifting that up in everything that we do to help folks protect their environment and their health.
You've been, Matthew, you've been a part of the EJ department for how long? 8-9 years?
Yeah, about 8.5 years right now. Yeah, somewhere around there.
So I'm sort of wondering about the timing of these conversations. I mean, the last couple of years, it seems like, we as a society are a lot more willing to have these conversations, the difficult conversations about race and about inequities in our neighborhoods, and certainly about climate change and the climate crisis. And so, I'm wondering, am I right? Is it more visible than before? Are we more willing to talk about it, and why?
100%. I mean, I think we're in a moment right now, like, and it's hard to really appreciate it when you're in a historical moment. I think we're really in a historical moment where, with a lot of the political changes that have been happening in the country, but just the social changes that have happened from Black Lives Matter, from the murders of folks like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, right? Like, we finally gotten to that place where our society, and white people in our society especially, are finally starting to come around to the fact that there's a history here that we're not in touch with, but we are very much a part of, right? And we need to start having that conversation much more openly, much more courageously. And at EPA, it's been a huge improvement in just our ability to connect what we do on environmental justice and why we do it to that history of systemic and structural racism. And when I was hired 8.5 years ago, there was a little gap in between when, I was offered the job and accepted it and I actually started. There was about a 2-month gap in there. And a lot of folks were asking me for interviews. A lot of folks down in Houston were like, oh my gosh, this is, let's interview that guy before he gets gobbled up by the government. And I remember, an official from that administration 8.5 years ago, they called me and just flat out, I wasn't officially on board yet. So they said, we can't tell you can't take these interviews, but I am going to tell you, don't let them trap you about talking about environmental racism. We don't talk about environmental racism. We talk about environmental justice. Don't let them trick you into talking about environmental racism. And I didn't know how to, it blew my mind. I was like, like reality? Like I can't acknowledge it. I can't talk about it. But we were encouraged not to talk about environmental racism. It was too touchy, right? It was still this taboo topic in the government. Today, with the Biden-Harris administration, with the obvious leadership of folks like Michael Regan, we've done a whole series now, just out of my program, open to the public, about the history of environmental injustices and structural racism in the United States, really tying together, right, the fact that these communities that have these disproportionate burdens, these communities that carry such vulnerability to any sort of pollution threat, they didn't happen by accident. It's not something we should feel good about, spending a little bit of time at the end of our day trying to figure out something to do on environmental justice. These places were created. They were created by laws. They were created by policies. They were created by decisions of our society and our government. And it's not just something good for us to do. It's our responsibility to understand that these places need our help the most, deserve our help the most, and should be the place we go to first to try to make any improvement happen in the health and environment. EPA has done an incredible job for 50 years protecting health and environment of most of the folks in the United States. But communities with EJ concerns are the communities that have been left behind. And I think that's one of the reasons why in this administration, folks like Administrator Regan, he says over and over again, we're centering our mission on environmental justice. It's because of that. It's because of a recognition that these places should be first in line for making sure that we're protecting them.
Incredible. I mean, Ronald, I'm wondering how you react to this. I'm shocked that even 8 years ago, I shouldn't be. I'm always naive. I should never be shocked by any of it. I know. But that was ever a conversation, that there was an expectation that you couldn't talk about environmental racism even 8 years ago. I mean, what do you think, Ronald, as a multidisciplinary artist working in that community, are you also seeing that these conversations are more prevalent than they were before, and that we're more?
Yeah, I think just in just since like the summer of 2020, you start to see more and more people getting on. Well, I'll just phrase it like this: these are things that we always kind of knew, just living in the community, right? But it's just like police brutality and police violence. It's a thing that's always existed, but now just has like eyes on it. But I do feel like now more than it was in the past, that these things actually have there's like anchor points to attach to move ourselves out of that, to alleviate these types of injustices within the community. But all that being said, I mean, it's never going to be easy, because the same folks that have benefited from it will make sure that those things stay in place as long as they are alive.
Sure. You talk in the film, and Matthew mentioned this too, that there was an intentional, the redlining was intentional. And I'm, so flabbergasted by how does that happen? How do people get away with it, and how do we stop it?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with who's involved in the conversation and who has access and has agency within it, right? When you don't have anyone that is from a community that would benefit from it being better there in that conversation, then you have a lot of folks that just really stand to benefit from it being the way it is.
Wow. Really horribly upsetting. I am also from Houston. I grew up in the Pasadena area, down in the midst of all the refineries. So Matthew, I'm sure you know my neighborhood as well as I do, the work you've done there. And I'm not joking when I say that I was 18 years old before I realized that the sky wasn't supposed to be bright orange at night.
Yeah.
And just sort of having that realization. But it was, it was a largely white and Latino area that I lived in. So I wasn't even really aware of inequities in the neighborhoods surrounding the refineries. Like, I didn't realize that my neighborhood was a place where the people who worked in the refinery, including my family members and including my neighbors, worked in the refineries, lived there. And there was a different quality of life than just on the other side of the same refineries. And this was not something, anybody really talked about, or that I knew existed. So, I'm wondering about that, about like just how these little inequities happened all over Houston, and how they happened in these little pockets, and how, what happened in my Deer Park ISD area, where people were maybe feeling a little bit safer about things, even though there were little pockets of toxic sludge in places. Like, why is it that my neighborhood was taken care of while the one across the other side of the refineries wasn't? How?
I think that goes back to choices, right? Choices that the government has made. It goes back to policies. It goes back to where we've invested our money. It goes back to where we created communities and who we dictated could live in this community versus that community, and then the whole response to it. I mean, we've had a lot of laws on the books for a long time that were supposed to be dealing with these very issues. And in a lot of ways, we're just now really getting down to the hard work of figuring out, like, how do our environmental laws really work to make sure we are being environmentally just. Like, that hard work is really just starting right now, thinking about things like, cumulative impacts in permitting of these big facilities, right? The practice still today is we permit individual facilities as if nothing else around them exists, which is completely removed from the reality that everyone should know, right? But especially folks who grew up in a place like Pasadena know there's all sorts of stuff in the air all the time, because there are dozens, if not, like on the ship channel, hundreds of different sources of pollution. We need to start understanding that our environmental regulatory endeavor has got to really unpack a lot of the 50 plus years of practice, because the way that we've implemented it has not matched the reality of the most overburdened communities. And in the same way, how do our civil rights laws intersect with our environmental laws? That's something that we are just starting in this administration, with a lot of urging, with a very clear mandate from the president and from Administrator Regan, starting to really unpack and figure out, okay, what do we do on civil rights? What do we do with these environmental laws to make sure we're advancing equity and justice? And what do we do with those two things together, right? Because they're all laws. We have to abide by all of them at the same time. What does it mean when we put our civil rights laws up right next to our environmental laws to make sure we're not having any sort of disproportionate burden or any sort of disparate impact on one group versus another group, so that everyone enjoys the same level of protection, the same level of health, and the same level of access to the benefits that any community would want to enjoy?
Do we have certainly, I mean, after Hurricane Harvey, absolutely devastating. I mean, I imagine you were here during Katrina and Rita and Ike, for all of those hurricanes, and now we had the freeze last year. I mean, is there a sense that people are paying more attention now to not just what's causing these drastic things, but to how inequitably they're affecting people?
I think so. I hope so. But I'm in Maryland now. I'm in DC, so I'm hoping so. I know that my family's still all back down in Texas. A lot of friends back down in Texas. From what I've heard and seen and experienced, I think folks are finally figuring out, wow, we were not ready for that freeze, and wow, that could happen anytime. Whoa, we had 3,000-year floods in the span of 4 years, I think it was.
Yeah.
But I would really look to Ronald, though. I mean, Ronald's down there. Like, do you think folks' attitude are finally changing?
I would like to say yes, because everyone is starting to see how much they are actually impacted, and no one's separate from any of this. But it becomes a thing of, like, it's like a partisan game where you don't want to blame your side for the things that are happening, though they happen to you too. Just with the freeze, everybody was without power, and there was something we could do about it. But as second we got power back, majority of people got power back, like the fight for, like, alleviating that stress from happening again, like, just kind of died down. So I mean, like, it's not that we don't all feel it. It's just at some point people just get distracted. But I think the main part of it all is just trying to figure out ways, whether it be through like documentary filmmaking or art or whatever it may be, like whatever medium a person has their hands on, access to, an agency in, is to make sure that people don't forget that these things just come back around. Like, it's not going to get any better until we all put eyes on it and like lay our hands on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanna lift that up exactly, Ronald, and thank you so much for your work to really try to document that and offer it for more folks. It is, in my experience at EPA, there's a lot of things we can do to try to change people's minds, and that's basically what we're doing in the EJ program at EPA, right? We don't have an EJ law. I can't go around and tell anybody I don't like that decision, make that decision, right? I've got to try to convince folks to do something different, and a lot of the time, that something different, even though, on the back end, I think it makes things better and easier, on the front end, it takes some extra work. It takes some extra effort to do right when you first start thinking about a permit or thinking about a rule or thinking about how we respond in an emergency situation. But every single time when I've had a colleague who has sat down with me and said, didn't understand that environmental justice thing, but I get it now. And they really start to think differently, like their behavior changes. It is because they have been able to interact with somebody from a community who sat down with them and said, here's my reality, right? Here's what I face on a day-to-day basis. Here's what's happening to my family. Here's what's happening to my kids. Here's what's happening to my elderly parents. Here's what's happening to my neighbors, right? And when a human being sits down with another human being and really lets them, explain their reality to them, is ready to take it in and connects it to the fact that you have something you can do to make their reality better, to make it more just, to make it more fair, that is the most powerful thing that we have to try to change people's minds, to try to change people's hearts, to really get them to connect it to not just some big, removed philosophical endeavor, but to the day-to-day decisions that we make at every level of government and in business and industry that has a real impact on people's lives and on communities' futures.
That's wonderful, and I'm glad you both touched on the question I wanted to ask, which was what can we do as artists and arts advocates? Sorry, what those who advocate for the arts. So having a Porky Pig moment. What can we do together to sort of amplify these problems and to help affect change? I think you just kind of answered that question.
Yeah, I would like to kind of echo what Mrs. Brown, Ms. Doris Brown said within the documentary. It's not a fight that you get to just walk into one day and walk out the next. It's forever. Like she's been doing it her whole life. She's moved from one community that was dealing with one set of issues to another that has its own set of issues, right? You can't escape it. It's all around us. It controls. It's the weather. It's the air. It's air quality. It's like your mode of transportation. It's all of this, right? There's no conversation separate from this. Like when people say things like, "Let's not get political," but like literally your whole life is based in like a political structure, right? Someone is writing a law saying that this thing is legal, not legal, or this is applicable to this and not that. So it becomes a thing where you have to give people a real tangible item, or like whether it be like a person's story, some kind of abstracted concept that allows them to see past themselves into like an actual issue. It's not an easy thing to change a person's mind, but the easiest thing, the first step is to let somebody in, right? To share your side of what your experience is.
I loved what she said, that you look in the mirror. It was something like you look in the mirror every day and you ask yourself, have I done enough? And the answer always has to be no.
Yeah.
Because there's still problems and there's still work to be done.
Yeah.
So then, Ronald, what's next for you? How are you going to continue this work?
So what I'm doing right now, I've been doing this for a while now. I do public artwork, fiber-based, and string large installations. So what I've been doing is going into historically Black and Brown communities, and I look for like places that have like the busiest thoroughfare with a lot of medians, and maybe the medians have trash or waste or debris from the community in it. And I clean up the median and I place artwork there. And most of these communities don't have public artwork that's there in that kind of sense. So it's more of like saying like the possibilities exist whether or not someone else presents them to you.
I love that. That's great. And I loved seeing, I have to say, love seeing the beautiful mural of George Floyd represented in your film and the third ward, and lots of public art happening in the background. If you were paying attention, it's just that to me, that's what the third ward is, you know, that visual art center. So really, really cool to see that.
Okay.
How about you, Matthew? What can we do to help? How are we going to save the world together?
I mean, just what Ronald was saying, right? So engaging those communities, supporting the communities, standing shoulder to shoulder with them, making sure that, you know, whatever's happening, it's based in the reality of the community. It's based in the demands and the desires and the vision of what that community wants to see happen. We can all play a part. It doesn't matter if we're academics or artists or civil servants or working for a for-profit company, right? We all have a responsibility and a role that we need to play. And one of the first things to do, just like Ronald is allowing us to do, right, is to start to engage with that reality, start to understand what those needs are, and always be centered on, you know, the folks who live in that community. What is their reality? What are their needs? And what can you do to stand shoulder to shoulder to help lift that up and support them on their journey to a better future?
The lived experience that you were talking about, and learning more about that. Well, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you, guys. I can't tell you enough how grateful I am to have a little bit of your time and have this conversation with you. Ronald, I'm so grateful for the film that you made. I hope that more people see it and have a reaction to it. Is there anything else that either of you would like to let our Houston Cinema Arts Festival audiences know before we go?
Well, I have one thing. It's not super related, but I started going to, I came to Houston to be to like make films about people. And, you know, here it is like 10 years later, and I finally had the opportunity to tell a story that I feel like is really impactful. You know, I've been going to the Houston Cinema Arts Festival for about 5 years, and to have the film that I created be a part of it and be a part of this is like really awesome. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
We really appreciate it too. Thank you. Matthew, any final words for our audiences?
No, I look forward to. I just received the link to the film a couple days ago. I'm gonna take a look at it this weekend. But I look forward to looking at anything else from the Arts Festival, and just continuing to engage with anybody involved in this fight. And like Ronald was saying, and like many of the folks in his film have said, you know, we're in this for life. This is a generational fight. The issues that we're working against have taken generations to create. They're going to take generations to fix. But we're in it for life.
I'm happy to be in it with you. And on behalf of Houston Cinema Arts Society and on behalf of lifelong Houstonians like myself, thank you for being excellent Houstonians, and thank you for fighting the good fight. You mean a lot to me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Ronald.
Thank you.
So long.
Bye.